Mom chose my controlling stepfather over me. Now she's desperate after he ruined the family store. Hey there. So, I'm a 27-year-old woman, and I've been estranged from my parents for close to 7 years now. I cut all ties after my grandpa passed away, mainly because my mom handed over the family bookstore to my stepdad, which didn't sit right with me. My dad died suddenly from a heart attack when I was just 3. It came out of nowhere and left everyone stunned. Not long after his death, his parents cut contact with my mom. She never saw them again. It was a tough time, but my maternal grandparents stepped in. They took us in, and we lived with them for the first few years after he passed. My mom had always been a stay-at-home parent since I was born, so when she suddenly had to find work, it wasn't easy. Even when she did land a job, it paid very little, and she had to put in twice the effort just to bring home enough money. Her parents offered her the chance to run the bookstore with them, but she didn't think it had long-term potential. She saw it more as a hobby than a stable career. Eventually, she took a job as a saleswoman for a stationery company. It took a couple of years, but she managed to save up enough to move us into a place of our own. I must have been around 6 or 7 at the time when we left my grandparents' house and started living independently. Until then, it had just been the two of us. My mom had been so focused on work that she didn't have much time or energy for anything else. Plus, she was still very much in love with my dad. I'd catch her staring at his pictures, crying quietly. It broke my heart, even as a kid. But once we settled into our own place, things changed. She began dating again. I'll be honest, I didn't take it well at first. Something about it made me uneasy, like maybe I'd start coming second. I couldn't quite explain why I felt that way, but deep down, it just didn't sit right with me. Even so, I never let it show. I was polite to every guy she brought home, no matter how uncomfortable it made me. I didn't want her to think I was upset. I'm a pretty open-minded person myself, and I've had casual flings, so it's not like I was judging her. But still, I always figured that if I had a child, I'd be a little more cautious about who I introduced into their life. It was just, every couple of weeks, there was someone new. I wasn't sure what she was looking for, but it didn't feel right. Still, I kept quiet. She had already gone through so much, worked herself to the bone, and grieved in her own way. I didn't want to make her feel worse. And besides, I was just a kid. I didn't know how to bring any of that up without sounding immature or disrespectful. Then, around the time I turned 12, she started seeing this guy named Steven. At first, he came across as a decent enough guy. He visited a few times, and we got along okay. I figured, like the others, it wouldn't last long. Maybe a couple of weeks and he'd be gone. But to my surprise, they stuck together. A few months passed, and their relationship didn't fizzle out. In fact, it got more serious. Steven started coming over more often, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes spending the night. Naturally, that meant I had to talk to him more. The more I did, the more I realized he was nothing like the guys she used to date. He actually seemed serious about her, which I respected. But at the same time, there was something off about him that I couldn't shake. After he came into her life, my mom started changing, not in small ways either. It was pretty obvious she was doing it for him. Steven had this strong, dominant personality. Not necessarily a bad thing, but my mom seemed to shrink around him. She'd agree with everything he said, almost like she was trying to impress him. It felt like I was watching a high school girl try to win over the most popular guy in school. She wasn't like that with the others. Sure, she liked them, but she never molded herself around them like this. It was unsettling. And whenever I was around the two of them, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider even if they weren't doing anything in particular. Still, I didn't speak up. I was 12, and some things just felt too awkward or grown up to bring up with my mom. Even when my grandparents visited and asked how things were going, I gave them answers I knew would make her look good. I never told them about how different she acted around Steven. After about a year of dating, Steven moved in with us. That's when things really shifted at home. He started changing everything about the place, decor, furniture, the whole vibe. He called it making things more gender neutral, which I might have understood if our home had actually been all pink and frilly. But it wasn't. It was already pretty balanced, if you asked me. Still, he redid everything and turned it into something that felt more like a man cave than a family home. Once he was finished, the whole place looked like a bachelor pad. Steven was proud of it, even said it finally felt like home to him. That made me uneasy, especially since his last home was a shared apartment with a bunch of younger roommates. I wanted to say something, to speak up about how weird it felt. I wanted to speak up about how Steven was changing everything in our home, but I didn't. Mostly because my mom told me to let it go. And honestly, since he hadn't touched my room, I figured it wasn't worth the fight. But the changes didn't stop there. Bit by bit, he started influencing other parts of our lives. He convinced my mom to stop eating meat, said he'd read somewhere that it wasn't good for her health and could lead to weight gain down the line. So, just like that, they both switched to a vegetarian diet. And of course, they tried to get me to hop on board, too. Thankfully, I was still in school and used the "I need protein for energy" excuse, which worked well enough to keep them off my back. Now, I'm not saying going vegetarian was the worst thing ever, but my mom used to love burgers, like, seriously love them. So giving that up was a huge sacrifice for her. On top of that, Stephen pushed her to quit sugar entirely. That one really hit hard. She became incredibly cranky, and the worst part was that she never took it out on him. Nope. I became her emotional punching bag instead. She'd snap at me for every little thing. Stephen introduced a whole bunch of healthy lifestyle habits after that, most of which were just random trends he found online. It always felt like he'd fall down a rabbit hole, obsess over something, and then drag everyone else into it. Honestly, the guy was strange. But my mom seemed to be head over heels for him, and as long as he wasn't forcing me to do anything, I figured I'd stay out of it. Then they got married just a few months later. Not long after the wedding, my mom told me she was planning to quit her job. Turns out, she was pregnant again. I was actually happy at first. The idea of having a little brother or sister was exciting. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel uneasy about her quitting work altogether. The way Stephen had control over her was already concerning, and now she was going to be completely dependent on him? That didn't sit right with me. I tried talking to her about it, more than once. I told her I didn't think it was a good idea, that maybe she should at least wait and see how things went. But she wasn't having any of it. She shut me down, told me I was just a kid and needed to stay in my lane. According to her, it was none of my business. So, after a while, I gave up. I figured she was an adult and had every right to make her own choices. Still, it stung. I don't think she realized or cared that her decisions absolutely affected me, too. I was part of the family, after all. I wasn't 5 years old anymore either. I was probably around 15 or 16, so it wasn't like I couldn't understand what was going on. Eventually, I just stopped pushing. I kept my thoughts to myself and let her do what she wanted. But then something awful happened. My mom had a miscarriage, probably about 3 months into the pregnancy. It hit her hard. It hit all of us hard, honestly. The doctors said it was likely due to her age. She was in her late 30s at the time. Stephen didn't handle it well either. For a while, the two of them barely spoke. They started sleeping in separate rooms, and their marriage hit a rough patch. It was painful to watch, especially because my mom needed support more than ever, and instead of being there for her, Stephen pulled away. Apparently, he told her he needed time and space to process things. So for months, they just coexisted under the same roof. They only talked when it was absolutely necessary, stuff like bills or groceries. That was it. During that time, my mom really opened up to me again. We reconnected, which felt nice after everything we'd been through. But that connection made it all the more painful when she eventually pushed me away again, this time, for good. See, when Stephen stopped talking to her, she leaned on me and my grandparents for comfort. We were the ones who supported her through that loss. And right around that same time, my grandmother had gotten sick, which probably played a part in my mom wanting to reconnect with us. A couple months later, my grandma passed away. Not long after the funeral, Stephen suddenly started acting like he cared again. He began putting in effort to repair his relationship with my mom. And they did start to rebuild things between them, but by then, I was done. Stephen had already lost my respect. The way he treated my mom after she lost the baby was heartless. I couldn't unsee that, and I couldn't forgive it either. He didn't just ignore her during the hardest time of her life, he started giving me the cold shoulder too. And let's be honest, he and I didn't have much to talk about to begin with. At that point, we were barely even speaking. So even though he tried to patch things up with her, I had already made up my mind. I didn't like the guy, and I didn't trust him one bit. About a year later, I left for college. Around that time, my mom and Stephen had started marriage counseling, and from the outside, it looked like things were improving. I'd come home on weekends when I could and split my time between visiting my mom and checking in on my grandpa. After losing my grandmother, he was incredibly lonely, and I felt like it was my duty to be there for him. He was running the bookstore alone, and I'd started thinking about joining him after graduation, maybe helping out with the finances or taking over some of the responsibilities. It felt like a way to stay connected to my roots. But I never got the chance. Just a few weeks before I was set to graduate, my mom called and told me that my grandpa had passed away in his sleep. It was peaceful, which I was grateful for, but it hurt deeply that I didn't get to say goodbye. To make things more complicated, on the day of the funeral, my mom told me something that knocked the wind out of me. Apparently, the lawyer, who was also the executor of my grandpa's will, had given her a heads up. She was going to inherit the bookstore. My grandpa hadn't updated his will before he passed, so while the bookstore was going to her, the house, the one I'd grown up in, my childhood home, was going to me. Even after Mom and I moved out of my grandparents' house, we used to visit them pretty often. So when I found out I'd be inheriting their home, I felt genuinely happy about it. And since my mom never really had much interest in running the bookstore, I figured it would make sense for me to step in. I thought it could be a solid place to start my career. It felt personal, meaningful. Plus, the bookstore wasn't doing badly at all. It still had a decent number of regulars, and business was holding steady. A few weeks after the funeral, once the will had been officially read, I finally brought it up with my mom. But before I could even get into what I had in mind, she told me she'd already spoken with Stephen and that he was going to take over the bookstore instead. I was stunned. I mean, yeah, legally it was hers to do with as she pleased, but still. I thought it was incredibly unfair. I tried to explain to her that I had a real connection to the place, especially after Grandma passed. I'd been helping Grandpa manage the store and handle finances, so I knew how things worked. The least she could have done was offer me a chance to run it or at least co-manage it with Stephen if that's what she really wanted. But she wouldn't hear it. She'd already made Stephen a promise and wasn't willing to go back on it. According to her, he had big plans to turn the store into a franchise and take it to new heights, and I needed to step aside. Honestly, I didn't think Stephen had it in him. We were one of the rare bookstores still doing okay in the digital age, and the idea of expanding just felt unrealistic. It made more sense to strengthen the one location we already had before dreaming bigger. We went back and forth, arguing about it for days. Eventually, she sat me down and said, point blank, that her decision was final. No more debates. She claimed I was starting to get on her last nerve and said she knew her parents better than I ever could and that they'd want what Stephen wanted. According to her, I just didn't understand the situation. She went on to say Stephen had been having a rough time at his own job and had been thinking about quitting for a while. The bookstore, she said, gave him something to fall back on, and she wasn't about to take that away from him. She told me to stop trying to take the business from him, and if I couldn't accept that, then I was free to walk away. She reminded me that I was an adult now and could handle life on my own. That hit me hard. She said it so coldly, all to defend Stephen. We got into a huge fight that night. And that was the last time we spoke. I walked out of that house and never looked back. After graduation, I never called her, and she never reached out to me either. She made it crystal clear, either I accepted Stephen running the bookstore, or I could leave. So I left, and I meant it. It's been 7 years since then. A lot has changed. I graduated, moved into my own apartment, landed my first real job. A couple of years back, I met my boyfriend, Dean, and we've been together ever since. Life has been good. I don't have any major regrets. Sure, there are moments when I miss my mom, but then I remember the way she spoke to me that day, and I snap out of it. I'd love to say I moved on and healed completely, but the truth is, it's not that simple. I didn't really mind the silence between us, I just couldn't shake the feeling that she had chosen Stephen over me. And deep down, I always kind of knew that if it came down to it, she would. I guess I was just hoping I was wrong. But I wasn't. And that was the final blow to any illusion I had about our relationship. With my grandparents gone, there wasn't any real reason to keep in touch with her anymore. So I didn't. I moved to a different part of the city, and we didn't run in the same circles. I told my extended family I didn't want to hear updates about her. It wasn't that I hated her, I just didn't want to reopen those wounds. So yeah, for 7 years, I didn't know anything about what my mother was up to. I had completely cut her out of my life. Then, just a couple of weeks ago, one of my cousins reached out. She said my mom had been asking around, trying to get in touch with me, wanted to know if it was okay to pass along my phone number and address. I was caught off guard. But then again, after I moved out, I changed my number and blocked her on everything. So if she wanted to reach me, going through family was her only option. I took a little time to think it over. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was also curious after all this time, what did she want to say to me? So eventually, I told my cousin it was okay and gave her permission to share my address. The very next day, my mom showed up at my door. Alone. I was a little surprised Stephen didn't come with her, but honestly, it made sense. We'd never had a real bond anyway. What followed was a pretty emotional reunion. There were a lot of tears. Then we sat down and talked. I told her about my life, filled her in on everything she'd missed. I introduced her to Dean, and she seemed genuinely happy to meet him. She kept asking me about my job, how I was doing financially, whether my position was secure. At first, I chalked it up to motherly concern. I mean, we hadn't seen each other in years, so maybe she was just trying to catch up. But after a while, it started to feel a little off. Like, sure, she could see I was doing alright, the apartment was nice, and my lifestyle probably spoke for itself, but still, she kept circling back to money. Asking subtle questions, almost like she was trying to figure something out. It didn't take long before I started to feel like something was off. The way my mom kept asking about my job, my income, my lifestyle, it felt like there was something more going on. And sure enough, after dancing around it for a while, she finally dropped the act. The reunion, the tears, all that talk about reconciling, it was just a setup. She came right out and said it. She was relieved to see I was doing well financially, because she and Stephen needed help. Turns out the bookstore wasn't doing well at all. Stephen's grand plan to turn it into a franchise had completely flopped. He opened multiple locations, but none of them were making any money. Worse, he had borrowed from friends and family to fund it, and now they wanted their money back. He'd sunk every last dollar they had into the business, and they weren't even making enough to cover their bills anymore. My mom told me they were terrified of what would happen if those loans were called in. They were in serious financial trouble, and she wanted me to bail them out. Then, just to top it off, she motioned toward Dean and said that since he was basically family now, maybe he could help too. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was stunned. She didn't come to apologize or reconnect. She came for a handout. And dragging Dean into it? That was the last straw. I told her, point blank, that I wasn't interested. And just to be clear, if she had come to me with genuine remorse, if she had truly wanted to make things right between us, I might have actually considered helping her out. But this? This wasn't about rebuilding a relationship. It was about money. We got into another argument. She called me selfish and ungrateful. Said she regretted even trying to reach out. And for once, I didn't hold back either. I let it all out, everything I'd bottled up since I was a kid. After she stormed out, Dean had to sit with me for nearly an hour to help calm me down. I was that worked up. What pissed me off even more was that she came alone. It was Stephen who had screwed up the business, not her, and yet she was the one who showed up asking for help. I had so much anger and resentment that had been building for years, and that day, it all spilled over. After everything, my relationship with my mom had never fully healed since she married Stephen. And 7 years ago, it broke completely. I had honestly started to think maybe we could patch things up, but clearly, that wasn't going to happen. My hope had only set me up for disappointment. I didn't hear from her again, at least not until a few days ago. By then, I'd nearly forgotten about the whole thing. She called to tell me they had no choice left but to sell the business. They were drowning financially, and now that everyone knew how bad things were, the people they owed money to were demanding it back. She said if I just helped her out that day, not even for her sake, but for my grandparents' legacy, none of this would have happened. She laid it all at my feet, like it was my fault. And I won't lie, it got to me. I know I'm not the one who messed things up, but still, I felt this weight in my chest. That bookstore meant everything to my grandparents. And to me. Watching it slip away like this, it hurt more than I expected. I could do something now, but part of me felt like they didn't deserve it. I didn't want to go back on my word. But I also didn't want to let go of something so deeply tied to my childhood. So yeah, I felt torn. Torn between standing my ground and honoring my grandparents. Update 1, hey everyone, first off, thank you so much for the kind comments and support. I've been thinking a lot about it, and I've made a decision. I'm not going to give my mother any money directly. But like many of you said, I just can't stand the thought of my grandparents' legacy being trashed like this. They worked too hard for that store. It meant something to them. It means something to me. So, I got in touch with a friend of mine who owns a restaurant chain he inherited from his dad. He's been looking to expand, and I pitched him the idea of turning the bookstore into a bookstore-cafe combo. He loved it. So now, we're buying out my mom and Stephen. My friend will be investing the bulk of the funds, but since I brought him the idea and I'm going to help run it, I'll be a partner in the business. We're offering them a fair price, no tricks, no undercutting. Just a clean deal. All that's left now is to tell my mom. I'm really hoping she hasn't found another buyer yet. It's only been a few weeks, so chances are she hasn't finalized anything. Fingers crossed. Update 2, it's been 2 days since my last post and I just got off the phone with my mom about 30 minutes ago. I laid everything out for her. Told her about my friend, the buyout plan, the cafe concept, and made it clear this would be a professional transaction, strictly business. To my surprise, she actually seemed open to it. She said she'd talk to Steven and get back to us. So it looks like this might actually happen. I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. I dreamed of running that bookstore my whole life, and now, it might really become something special. Dean and I are already celebrating. Update 3, it's been a couple of weeks, and I've been swamped, but I wanted to check back in because, it's happening. My mom and Steven agreed to the deal. They're officially out, and my friend and I have taken over the business. There's a lot of renovation ahead, we've got big plans, but we're knee-deep in it already. It's going to take time before we see real profit, but I'm hopeful. I feel like I've done something meaningful. Something my grandparents would be proud of. It's hard to explain, but I just have this gut feeling that it's all going to work out. This place, this legacy, it's where I was meant to be. All I need now is everyone's blessings. And to all of you who offered advice, encouragement, or just a kind word along the way, thank you. You have no idea how much it meant to me.